Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Semester 6 students, today we will start a new topic, language acquisition, page number 203. How children acquire languages from their birth till they are able to speak. How they learn it and how they exercise it. One thing is learning, the other thing is practice, or you can say exercise when they physically use the language. The chapter begins. This chapter is concerned with the processes by which human beings acquire a language, how they attain the ability to comprehend and produce utterances in it. We begin with first language acquisition, the processes by which children learn to speak the language of the community they are born into. While there is considerable individual variation in the acquisition process, this variation falls within limits and acquisition follows regular patterns. We discuss 4 general learning strategies that have been suggested to be relevant to the acquisition of language by children. Finally, we deal with the acquisition of language by adults, inquiring into the extent to which this process resembles first language acquisition and the extent to which adults can acquire native-like command of a language, expertise in speaking that language, in writing effective sentences. First one, we'll move on to major features of child language acquisition. The first thing we'll discuss there is general characteristics of language acquisition. Preliminary remarks, initial remarks that are given regarding this acquisition process. Normal children in all societies acquire within the space of a few years fluent control of a language. Sometimes 2 or more. By the time they are 5 years old, they know several thousand words. At the age of 5 years, thousands of words are known to the children. First thing. Moving on, he says, have acquired the major phonological and grammatical systems. Second thing is phonological sounds. Third thing, grammatical structure, which is correct, which is incorrect, where to put in a helping verb, where to put in a preposition, and how to speak correct language of their language or languages, as well as the fundamentals of the semantic and pragmatic systems, and how the language is used in its social context. Exceptions are few. Children with severe physical handicaps, such as extreme mental retardation or Down syndrome, may not acquire a language fully. Very rarely, a child is not exposed to sufficient speech. It happens in a few cases. The language or languages a child acquires depends on the languages habitually spoken around them by their parents and other community members. So, in language acquisition, society plays a major role. Peers, friends, relative, surroundings, all these contribute a large portion to the acquisition of language. Including other children they interact with, peers. Children have no genetic predisposition to speak a particular language if removed from their biological parents at an early age, and brought up by foster parents who do not speak the language of the natural parents, the child will learn the foster parents' language like any native born child. So, the first learning place of a child is home, the language that is spoken by parents. No matter the parents are real ones or foster parents, but the place where the child starts in his learning age, he will learn that very language. Although a good deal is known about the processes of acquisition of language, children about what and when, in what sequence the child learns, many questions relating to how and why remain unanswered. That how they learn, why they learn or acquisite with the certain language, it is unknown. There are major disagreements on the issues of whether or not we are genetically programmed to speak and the learning processes by which language is acquired. It is simply a doubt till date. In no society are children explicitly taught to speak their first language. No one teaches them initially how to speak their native language, but they learn by observation, by imitating, by experience. They acquire spoken language spontaneously in everyday interactive situations. Explicit instruction is unnecessary, and if given, usually has little effect because the child does not take instructions. The child experiments and learns. Deaf children, of course, are unable to perceive the acoustic input of languages spoken around them, but if exposed to a sign language, they also acquire it spontaneously. This spontaneous acquisition of speech and signing contrasts with writing, which is usually learned through explicit instruction. Most children learn to write in school because writing needs proper instructions or are taught by parents or siblings, but speaking does not need any instructions. Acquisition of all languages is believed to proceed through similar development stages. However, it must be cautioned that intensive investigations of acquisition have been carried out in a vanishingly small fraction of the world's approximately 7,000 languages. Most studies have focused on major languages of Europe, especially English, and Asia, particularly Mandarin, Chinese, and Japanese. Comparatively few studies have been undertaken of acquisition of indigenous languages of Australia, Papua New Guinea, the Pacific Islands of North and South America. This represents a serious limitation in our knowledge. Moving on, basic schedule of acquisition. The pattern. Basic schedule of acquisition, or you can also say pattern of learning. The child's acquisition of language is a staged process. There is a proper hierarchy that is followed. There is a proper pattern that is followed in learning. Like a ladder, you need to step on the first step in order to reach the top. Similarly, acquisition of language is a staged process. The stages which are similar across the range of languages in which acquisition has been investigated are as follows. The stages are pre-language stages of cooing. The first stage is cooing, producing sounds, not words. The sounds that will communicate the message to the attendant that what is needed. For example, weeping. For example, naming different things with different sounds which are only understood by siblings, relatives, or parents who are continuously in contact with the child. Beginning at about 2 or 3 months, and babbling beginning at around 6 months. Cooing and babbling are the first two things that a child learns in his early age. One word stage beginning at about a year or so, uttering only single word. Second one is one word stage. Now the child has entered into the age of 7 or 8 months, and there he starts speaking one word, calling mama, baba, dada, water, or different other terms that he might have heard with the sounds being spoken around him. Third stage is two-word stage, beginning at 18 to 20 months. After one word, the third stage is two-word stage. Cooing, one word and two-word stage, and the age is 18 to 20 months. Telegraphic speech, beginning at 2 or 3 years of age. The fourth one is telegraphic stage. At the age of 2 to 3 years, able to communicate the message with the help of broken sentences, more than 2 to 3 words. Basic mastery at around 4 or 5 years. He knows the sentences, and we call it basic mastery. Now he has learned language to a sufficient level, and now he can communicate meaningful sentences to the attendant or listener. Elaboration and expansion, especially of lexicon, also to some extent grammar, continuing throughout life. And after it, after basic mastery, the elaboration and explanation process of structure and grammar, this continues throughout the life afterwards. Children vary considerably as regards the times they reach the various stages, some entering the stages very early, some very late. For example, Albert Einstein is said not to have begun talking until 5 years of age. Regardless of whether the child is fast or slow in the acquisition of language, in the long run it seems not to matter. Late talkers end up with full control of the language because they start speaking at that age when they are able to explain and elaborate the language. Moreover, it should not be presumed that the stages are rigidly distinct. They merge into one another. Below we discuss these 6 stages in order. Now we are going to explain these 6 stages one by one. First one, pre-language stages. The earliest stages of child language acquisition are the pre-language stages, which last from about 2 months to a year of age. At around 2 months, the child typically begins to produce vocalizations called cooing. These vocalizations consist of syllable, often repeated, made up of a velar consonant plus a back vowel, like coo, gaga, and goo. By about 6 months, the child is generally sitting up and producing a wider range of sounds, including stops, nasals, and fricatives. In this stage, babbling, the child produces word-like utterances, typically CV syllables. Though they are not recognizable as words of the language, the phones are not necessarily restricted to those of the surrounding language. For example, children in an English-speaking environment sometimes produce retroflex stops and bilabial fricatives. But as time goes on, the phones in babbling tend increasingly towards the phones heard in the language environment. In the later stages, towards the end of the child's first year, babbling becomes more controlled and different intonation patterns may be used. Deaf children also babble vocally, though they usually cease to do so by about 9 months of age. Due to lack of auditory feedback, deaf children exposed from birth to a sign language babble manually from about 10 to 14 months. They produce a range of hand gestures that are not necessarily found in the sign language to which they are exposed. According to some investigators, Hearing children also produce manual babbles. Rhythmic motor actions produced as part of the process of gaining control of bodily movements. These are different to the babbling of deaf children exposed to a sign language. Now the second stage, one word stage, where a child speaks one singular word. At around 12 to 18 months, children produce first recognizable words. These words occur alone in single unit utterances, and thus the term one word stage or holophrastic stage. A one word utterance can be given different intonation, contours to express different speech acts. For example, following intonation for a statement, rising for a question or request, requesting for something, questioning something that needs to be answered in order to satisfy their thirst for knowledge. The first words tend to be similar both phonetically and semantically, regardless of the language. They tend to consist of CV syllables and rarely contain consonant clusters. The first words are lexical rather than grammatical and generally label concrete objects or individuals that the child interacts with, like mummy, daddy, and kitty. Also common in this stage are words of negation used in refusal, no, non-existence, remarking on appearance or attention, drawing attention to something or someone, for example, he. Similarly, they might say, and now these are different sounds which are, if we consider them as being phonetics, words that are uttered by the child. In the one word stage, language tends to be closely tied into the interactive context and shows little displacement. Utterances tend to be interpersonally oriented, engaging the child interactively with the parent or caregiver. Then comes the two word stage. By 18 to 20 months or so, the child typically has an active vocabulary of some 50 words. This increases dramatically over the next few months, so that by 2 years of age, the child's vocabulary will normally increase to around 200 or 300. When a child has a vocabulary of around 50 words, they begin to put the words together in two word utterances. Before this, children often string together sequences of separate utterances with pauses in between them. The first two word utterances tend to express the same kinds of meanings as in the one word stage, but do so more explicitly. Negation or refusal, for example, no bed, recurrence as in more milk, non-existence as in algone, doggy, and attention, for example, hi daddy. New kinds of meaning begin to appear later in this stage, including actor action as in mummy eat or eat mummy, quality thing in a bad kitty, possession as in baby chair, thing location, for example, doggy table. These are different utterances that are uttered by the child. For example, action location, go park, action undergoer as in eat brekkie, and actor undergoer as in mummy dinner. At this stage in the speech of many children, words specifying things occur in second position. Moving on, telegraphic speech, the fourth one. Multiple word utterances usually make the first appearance sometime during the third year of life. Multiple word utterances begin, at least in English, as strings of lexical words without grammatical words or morphemes. This is called telegraphic speech, after the style of expression that used to be used in telegrams. In this stage, function words and morphemes such as prepositions and inflectional morphemes begin to appear. The acquisition of inflected forms of words differs depending on the morphological complexity of the language. In a morphologically simple language like English, it lags behind that of more morphologically complex languages where the morphology is more silent. Basic mastery. By 4 or 5 years of age, most children have acquired a basic mastery of their language. Their vocabulary will stand at well over 1,000 items. And the basic systems of phonology, morphology, and syntax will be in place. Continued acquisition, elaboration, explanation that continues throughout the life. Language acquisition continues throughout life. This is especially true of lexical items, which continue to be acquired in adulthood, although at a much slower rate than for the 2-year-old child. Certain registers, such as scientific and legal registers in Western cultures, may not be acquired until late adolescence or even adulthood. Some aspects of grammar take a longer time than others for children to acquire. For example, the numeral classifiers of many Southeast Asian languages, words that specify the semantic type of an object and have to occur in noun prepositions with numerals. For 2 pencils, one might say 2 long objects, pencils. For 2 coins, 2 round objects, coins, are often not fully acquired until the child is 10 or more years of age. One study of 10-year-old Thai speakers revealed only about 90% of correct usage of numeral classifiers according to adult norms. My own adventurous observations suggest that tag questions in English may not be fully acquired until adolescence. Thus, children of 10 or 12 may use negative tags to negative clauses, as in, he did not go yesterday, did not he? In circumstances where adults would use positive tags, as in the unmarked, he did not go yesterday, did he? Then comes the caretaker speech. The teacher it might be, or the caretaker at home. As mentioned earlier, many languages have special speech registers for talking to young children. Adults do not speak to infants or interact with them in the same ways as with other adults. These registers, variously called baby talk, mother-s, child-directed speech, and caretaker speech. We will use the last term, have characteristics that assist or are believed to assist the child's acquisition of language. Caretaker speech in Western cultures tends to be characterized by a slow rate of delivery, exaggerated intonation, high pitch, palatalization of consonants, repetition, high frequency of diminutive forms like the English y, e, y ending in doggy, kitty. Simple syntax, short utterances. One study found that the average length of sentences addressed by mothers to 2-year-olds was less than 4 words. And simple and concrete lexical items, sometimes unusual or complex phonemes, are replaced by more common or simpler ones, and sometimes special lexical items peculiar to caretaker speech are used, often involving simpler syllabic structures and repeated syllables. These characteristics tend to be broadly associated with caretaker speech in many cultures. Some studies suggest that the intonation patterns used by mothers or other caretakers when talking with young infants carries information about approval and disapproval, and that similar patterns are used in different societies to encourage or discourage the child to do something. But rhapsodic features are not universal. High pitch is not always a feature of caretaker speech. In Qaish Mayan, Mesoamerica, caretaker speech is characteristically low pitched, high pitch being used in speech to socially dominant individuals. The role of caretaker speech in language acquisition, to what extent it really does facilitate acquisition or is tailored to the needs of the child, is an issue on which there is considerable difference of opinion. Experimental evidence suggests that infants tend to prefer caretaker speech to ordinary adult-to-adult speech. Unfortunately, caretaker speech has not been studied across a representative sample of languages. After the language has been acquired, has been learned by the child, now comes acquisition of phonetics and phonology. How the child advances in learning sounds, in learning syntax, in learning accurate pronunciation. Before the end of their first year, children recognize a number of words involving a range of different consonants and vowels, although they are unable to produce more than a few of them themselves. The perception of speech sounds begins very early, some phonetic differences being perceived from a very young age. Even 1-month-old babies are able to perceive the difference between pa and ba, regardless of their language environment. Very young babies show preferences for the voice of their mother over the voices of other women. They also prefer the language the mother speaks. A baby of a French-speaking mother prefers to hear French over other languages. Before the child can produce any words, he or she has acquired some of the basic intonation patterns and auditory characteristics of the language. By a year of the age, the child's ability to hear sound contrasts that are phonemic in the language being acquired is enhanced, while the ability to hear sound differences that are not contrastive begins to deteriorate. Nasals and stops are generally among the earliest consonants acquired, as in mama and papa, and the earliest vowels, with u appearing slightly later. Labial consonants tend to be mastered earlier than consonants at their other places of articulation. By the age of 4, children learning English are generally able to produce all the contrasting vowels and diphthongs, though a few consonants still cause difficulty. These include the fricatives, which are unusual across the world's languages and are the last consonants to be fully acquired, as well as affricates, and some fricatives, and the voiced in some phonetic environments and remain problematic. The position of a consonant in a word is relevant to its acquisition. Consonants are more likely to be correctly produced at the beginning of words than elsewhere. Final consonants generally emerge latest in production. A characteristic of language acquisition is that perception precedes production. Children are often able to perceive contrasts that they are unable to produce. This is nicely revealed in the following quote. And the quote says, "One of us, for instance, spoke to a child who called his inflated plastic fish a fish. In limitation of the child's pronunciation, the observer said, 'This is your fish.' 'No,' said the child, 'my fish.' He continued to reject the adult's imitation until he was told, 'This is your fish, my fish.' Because the child, thou not uttering the last alphabet in fish, he meant my fish." Trends are also discernible in the ways in which children change the sound shape of words they produce, replacing certain phones by non-adult ones. Among the trends are the following. Velars are often replaced by alveolars. For instance, gone might appear as dawn. Fricatives tend to be replaced by stops. Thus, C might be pronounced T. Word final consonants tend to be omitted. For instance, kick might be pronounced as, with replacement of the velar stop by an alveolar stop, kick. Unstressed syllables are often omitted, as in na for banana. Consonant clusters tend to be avoided. Thus, kai might be produced as kai. There is a tendency for phones to harmonize within words. Thus, dog might appear as gog, where the first consonant has fully harmonized with the second. Thumb could appear as num, showing partial harmonizing of the initial consonant with the following nasal. Laterals and rhotics tend to be replaced by glides. I might be replaced by J, as in jag or leg. So, this is how child acquires language. This is how he moves on throughout his life. Acquisition of lexicon, the syntax, how he comes to know about the correct make of sentences. We mentioned above, the child acquires their first words around a year of age. Between 18 and 36 months, the child's vocabulary increases rapidly, doubling every 6 months. It doubles again over the next year. By 4 years of age, a typical child is estimated to have a vocabulary of around 1600 words. The early lexicon of children acquiring English tends to be made up of a high proportion of nouns. This has been thought to reflect the inherent conceptual simplicity of nouns over verbs. It could also reflect a greater salience of nouns in caretaker speech in English. The early lexicons of children acquiring languages in which verbs occur more frequently than in English, and in languages in which they tend to occur finally in the clause, sometimes show a higher proportion of verbs. As in the acquisition of phonetics and phonology, perception precedes production by about 18 months of age. When a child has an active vocabulary of around 50 words, some studies have revealed that they can understand up to 5 times as many words. This difference remains throughout life. Adult speakers recognize and understand many more words than they actively use. So, acquisition of noun is easier than the acquisition of verbs, and the child at the age of 4 years is estimated to have learned 1600 words, because every 6 months vocabulary doubles. So, this is all for today. In the next lecture, we will begin with acquisition of semantics. Whereby we will discuss, first of all, overextension, then second thing is underextension, and the third thing, mismatch. The processes that are involved in speaking of language. Thank you.